Surround sound is all about making the audiovisual experience more realistic, more exciting, more memorable. One can experience surround sound in a movie theatre, at a home theatre, in a playhouse, in a state-of-the-art museum, at an exhibition, at open-air performances, at entertainment parks, and in Sonnet Lumiere or sight and sound shows. Surround sound can bring the nooks and crannies of the narrative space alive and make it a participant in the unfolding drama.
Now, the basic thing of surround sound we have to remember is it represents a three-dimensional sonic space as opposed to a two-dimensional visual space which is represented by the picture. So, these obviously, as we go up in the number of channels, we have more information that can be encoded, more information that can be packed in a situation. So, this gives us sonic space where we are situated into the action.
The celebrated film theorist Andre Baza had said that cinema is destined to approach reality asymptotically. What he meant to say is that cinema tries to replicate some aspects of the real world without ever getting to the whole reality. The technology of surround sound takes cinema closer to the experience of reality.
Possibly it's a little bit skewed opinion that Andre Baza only talked about cine realism and that is the only kind of narrow pathway of destiny of cinema he could see. But anyway, if we take that the cinema its way towards realism, more and more realism, if we take that for the time being, then we can say that surround sound posits itself as a more realistic experience. Okay, that is the tagline possibly, but one actually cannot create real life sound experience in theatre. So, what we can create is a kind of fiction. It's like it's like this. We read a story, we can tell that it's a real story and one can tell it's a fiction. So, artwork lies between our frontal real experience and our imagination. So, cinema and sound experience is also like that. But there are efforts for various from various technological quarters to create I would say to create a different order of experience. If I would like to see it from that way, that I would take 5.1 only for the sake of realism, that would be I do not know whether one can really stand by that, because we know lot of films which were made even in mono or later in stereo, which can claim their real experience possibly far richer than 5.1 experience. So, there is always a portion of mind that plays a game.
Ну вот, мы и дома.
In 1940, Walt Disney produced a musical animation film called Fantasia. Disney was inspired by Rimsky-Korsakov's musical composition, Flight of the Bumblebee. He incorporated a bee character in his film Fantasia and wanted to give his viewers an experience that the bee was flying about in all parts of the movie hall. The film was released as a double-header, which means the halls required 2 projectors to run the film. Disney kept the sound on a separate reel to be run in sync with the picture. There were 3 sound tracks printed on each sound reel. The sound negatives were themselves single track. 3 sound negatives were printed with lateral displacement on the sound positive. Special equipment was required to give the stereo effect. This equipment was set up at the movie theatres that opted for the stereo effect. The equipment weighed 15,000 pounds and was transported from venue to venue on railway flat cars. These were the days of vacuum tubes. The speakers had electromagnets because strong permanent magnets were not available those days. The electromagnets in the speakers needed a DC power supply. To diffuse the sound in the movie theatre, 54 speakers were used. Most of the hall owners were put off by the cumbersome paraphernalia and opted for the mono sound. The experiment was successful, but its practical application proved to be a failure. However, it pioneered a lot of methods that are in common use today. For example, the pan pot was designed specifically for this film. But most importantly, Fantasia ushered in the era of multi-track recording. Monophonic sound is a single-track, unidirectional kind of sound reproduction. All the elements in the sound, such as voice, instruments, effects, etc., appear to originate from the same point in space, as if everything is funneled to a single point. If you connect two speakers to a monophonic amplifier, the sound will appear to originate at a point equidistant between the two speakers, creating a phantom channel. Stereophonic recording was introduced in the 1950s. In stereophonic recording, sound from different sources is unequally distributed over two channels. As a result, the listeners experience the correct sound staging of symphony orchestra recordings. Even though more realistic than monophonic sound, stereophonic sound creates a wall effect. That is, everything hits the listener from the front. It lacks the natural sound of back wall reflections and other acoustic elements of a natural listening environment. In the early 1970s came quadraphonic sound. In 1967, the rock group Pink Floyd performed the first ever surround sound concert at Games for May, a lavish affair at London's Queen Elizabeth Hall. Here, the band used its custom-made quadraphonic speaker system.
Quadraphonic systems was a little different from the surround sound that we know today. It basically consisted of, if a room would be of this dimension, then the speakers will be placed on four corners of that room, and the front speakers will be front left right and the rear speakers will be rear left right or surround left right. This will be achieved by using a process called multiplexing, and this multiplexing used to be encoded on two tracks of a LP record, and that will be decoded, but there were 2 or 3 different systems of encoding and there was no universal compatibility of one with the other. So therefore this format did not stay in the market for long. But later on, as digital age came, the same quadraphony was adopted by something called the Dolby Surround, which has 4 channels, or in other words, the left channel, the center channel, the right channel, and the surround channel. That is the 4.1, and basically all the low frequencies from all the channels will be routed to another channel called the subwoofer or the LFE, low frequency effects. These placements actually happened because of the screen or because of the ratio of the different kind of shooting formats. In earlier days, 70mm formats, like for example the Todd AO format, had 6 channels, and they were actually very expensive and very difficult to maintain. They had 3 magnetic coating on each side of the frame, and if for example a horse is running from left to the right of the screen, the sound will be panned like that. But it was not in proper sense what is called surround sound now.
In the mid-1970s, Dolby Labs unveiled a new surround sound experience through the science fiction films Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
And that was one format which is still available today. It was DTS, so or digital theatre system, which was introduced by George Lucas. And then Dolby was also parallelly developing their own systems, and finally Dolby came up with their own SR system and Dolby digital surround systems finally.
The Dolby surround process involves encoding 4 channels of information: front left, center, front right, and rear surround into a 2-channel signal. A decoding chip then decodes the channels and sends them to the appropriate destination.
Now, what is this 5.1 format? In order to understand this, we have to understand first the placement of the speakers, how they should be placed in order to be heard the proper mix, because when something is mixed in a studio, it is intended that the listening condition or the listening environment is suitable for the purpose. For earlier, it was less complex in nature, since it only involved 2 speakers, the left and the right speaker. But with the increase of number of speakers, with the increase of the number of lower frequency attenuators or low frequency generators like the subwoofer, the entire sonic space has to be organized much more ideally than in our normal home condition. So, it is always advised that we exactly know what is the situation of the listener in a proper 5.1 environment. Now, if we draw a hall like this, a rectangular hall, if we imagine, the left, the right speaker and the center speaker is headed inward a little bit to get a -3 decibel sound from the center speaker, and the left speaker, right speaker and the listener is always in a equilateral triangle, so that A equal to B equal to C, and the rear speakers are also kept as left surround, right surround as an equilateral triangle. And all the speakers have to be pointed towards the ear of the listener, and the listener has to sit in the middle, so that he forms 2 equilateral triangles with respect to the front speakers and the rear speakers. And the subwoofer has to be placed behind the screen, obviously, which will generate the entire low, since we know that low frequency sounds are omnidirectional in nature. So, therefore, we do not need low frequency from all the speakers. We can sum it up in one large low frequency generator, which kind of generates the low frequency for all the speakers. Now, in the new systems, it is believed that low frequency has also its own direction. Therefore, this new system called 7.2, where there are 2 subwoofers placed on 2 sides of the hall. So, these new technologies are coming up, and there are more complex things which are being tried out. Like in 10.1 speaker systems, there are speakers on the ceiling to kind of simulate sounds coming from the sky.
Filmmakers in different countries have adopted this new technology in their own ways and created distinctly different sound aesthetics.
There is a recent film, I think in 2006, there is a film called Milky Way by a Hungarian director, Benedikt Flegyov. This film, it's actually an 81-minute long film and consists of 9 shots. So, each shot is around 9 minutes long. So, extremely long shots, and in that shots some characters, there is some movement, landscape, some situation, no dialogue, possibly there is no dialogue, and each sequence is embedded with rich tapestry of sound, all what we may call diegetic sounds. There is no music, I guess, and those sounds are layered, various levels of real sounds, those are layered and piled one upon another, and those are being played throughout the 360-degree channel. So, it is not like that there is a cinematic space, there is a left and right, and something is happening at the left corner, so it would come from the left surround speaker, something like that. It is, orientation is not like that. I feel, I had the opportunity to see it in a proper cinema hall. It is like a total 360-degree space of sound, and this film is what we see in the screen. Another important thing is that this film was shown or is being shown both as a standard film in a proper cinema hall, and also it is being projected in art galleries. So, I think this kind of films would be seen later as a kind of crossover between standard cinema and ambient cinema. So, it is always already playing a function of ambient cinema, because when it is rolling in a gallery, it is in a loop, and people are coming, seeing a bit of that film and going and seeing something else, again coming and see a bit and may go away. So, it is actually offering an environment, nothing more than that, not much of story, not much of dynamization, character, narrative closure, nothing like that. It is offering just an audiovisual environment.
It will be interesting to explore how Indian mainstream cinema has adopted this technology.
In Indian scene, we would see a rather kind of apathy to record in situ sounds. There is always a tendency to build up the sound, even if it is a diegetic sound, suppose bus sound, train or whatever environmental sound. It is there is a tendency that we always try to gather sound separately and try to put the sounds in the soundtracks later. So that way, even for the diegetic sounds, there is a tendency that we would like to create it later, and the relationship between the shooting atmosphere is always a bit separate from the later sound atmosphere. There is a tendency to boost up the sound almost beyond the prescribed limit, even which is set by Dolby or DTS standards. But it can be seen from a cultural perspective also, because these kind of films are supposed to be played vis-a-vis the emerging fan culture of, because these films are big budget films with big stars who have a huge fan following, and in Indian cinema halls, especially when these big star films are being screened, we can see that there are various fan activities going on, which itself create a lot of sound. The shouting, shrill whistles and different kinds of dancing, all kinds of activity that go on simultaneously. So, one can say that this kind of very immersive thick sound wall, what we see, a very high energy sound level, plus 100 dB sound, all these things actually can consume all the sounds which are being produced inside the cinema hall itself. So, that way it can be seen as a cultural tendency as well. The claim of DTS or 5.1, sorry, not DTS, 5.1, 7.1, these surround sound systems as more real sounds is only partly true. It cannot be, it cannot hold its stake of realism just for the sake of it. But there can be other kinds of uses of this new technology, which is important to understand. Even in India, like I do not know, it is very important that we are recording this interview on the day Mani Kaul passed away. So, I do not know if Mani Kaul would have used surround sound, what would have been the result of that. We missed that opportunity. But the point is that there are some assumptions going on in various quarters of the world that possibly our cinematic experience would take some different route.
If the Hollywood science fiction films forged a whole new aesthetics of sound in cinema, the Russian sensibility took a more subtle trajectory.
Like if we take this sequence from Tarkovsky's Stalker, the famous sequence, the trolley sequence, scientist and the writer and the stalker, they are all moving to the zone through on a trolley. There is something happening. Visually it's stunning, lot of things happening. I am not going into that.
Они нас не догонят? Да что вы, они ее боятся как огня. Кого?
Narrative wise not much thing is happening, they are just moving on a trolley. But in sound, we looked carefully. First we hear the sound of the trolley and it has a certain rhythm. after some time, the rhythm of the trolley and the sound texture of the trolley is being represented through a kind of very latent music, latent rhythm music. We see that the trolley sound is getting cross-faded into that musical sound, and the musical sound is again cross-faded to the trolley sound, and it creates almost like a, I should say, auditory lullaby, a kind of, and if it goes on, there is a possibility that one may feel little bit of sleepy. So when we see stalker, some of our friends, or we see many people that they feel sleepy, it's actually not their guilt, it's mixed in the film structure only. That sequence of stalker may be seen as a seed of for what we call ambient cinema, that it's an environment basically. We are not seeing a story per se, we are not seeing a character per se, though those are there, but basically it is creating an environment which has a very direct psychological effect on the mind.
This film Chitra Sutram, or Image Threads, The Image Threads, is a Malayalam feature film made by the director Vipin Vijay and edited by Devkamal Ganguly, and I myself, Shubhadeep Sengupta, did the sound design for the film. It was a difficult journey for all of us because this film lasted for quite a long time, almost 1.5 years, 1 year of sound design and 6 months. It almost took more than 5 months to finally mix the film. And this is the format of this film is DTS, which is a 5.1 surround format. And let us examine some of the experiments that we have actually tried to do in this film and probably relate to it. Actually, this film has several sonic spaces, and there are basically 3 sonic spaces. One is of the main protagonist who lives in a room in a very old house, and who is also a cyber hacker, or he kind of teaches computer in a computer institute, IT institute. And then he actually has these fantasies, or they may be real life encounters with his grandfather, who was a kind of necromancer and a black magician, and at the same time he also has these kind of flings within the internet, maybe with a porn star, or sometimes with someone called Ramani, who has her existence only in the virtual world. So while designing the sound of this film, we had to encounter how to fuse these 3 spaces together. So we kind of researched on different kind of sounds and electronic noises and effects to kind of specify and signify one kind of and distinguish one kind of atmosphere from the next. For example, there are long conversations between the main protagonist Hari and Ramani, which constantly intercuts between this real space and sonically completely different virtual space.
നീ ആരാണ്?
രമണി.
നീ എവിടെയാണ്?
ഞാൻ എവിടെയായാലെന്താ?
നീ എന്തു ചെയ്യുന്നു?
നിന്റെ പോർട്രേറ്റ് വരയ്ക്കുന്നു.
നീ സംസാരിക്കുന്നത് ഹരി എന്ന വ്യക്തിയോടല്ല.
എനിക്കൊരു വ്യക്തിയോടും സംസാരിക്കാനാവില്ല.
എന്തുകൊണ്ട്?
വ്യക്തിത്വം പഴഞ്ചൻ പ്രമാണമാണ്, തെക്കാർത്തിൻ്റെ കോർഡിനേറ്റ് സങ്കല്പം.
എനിക്കത് മനസ്സിലായില്ല.
So in sound what we did, there are obviously the protagonist is situated in a real space, real looking space, so it would have its own ambience or diegetic sounds, that is fine. But what he is encountering through internet is not something what we call, that is not embedded in that reality. Suppose he is doing a chat, that kind of chat in a room, the room cannot define his experience, his internet experience. So that way we thought of some some way, some means to cross that enclosure of reality in some way. So, Shubhadeep Sengupta was the sound designer, and he recently got a national award also for that work. So, what he did is something interesting. He used some electronic frequencies which are rather tones of or micronotes, 1 or 2 tones, something like that, and those are mixed with the ambience, whatever diegetic sound we are expected to hear in a situation like that. So, those tones are, it is not like that it is creating a kind of psychological state of the character, something like that. It is just some markers, like audio markers, that what you are listening and what you are hearing is not exactly framed within a very normal real like situation. There might be a trajectory beyond that.
Aesthetic requirements often lead to the invention of new technology. Technology in its turn generates new aesthetics. Technology and art complement each other to enrich the language of audiovisual media.
One idea comes from Lev Manovich, who says that the cinema would be of future would be like macro cinema. He uses the term called macro cinema. He says that basically the in a very nutshell, the idea is that now the standard film resolution is 2K. Technically it is called 2K, 2000 something. In near future it would be increased to 4K, 8K, even to 16K standards, and it is expected that when those images would be projected, we would see images much more clear, much more crisper, much more with much more clarity than what we see with our normal naked eye around when we encounter reality. So, that way there would be a case of hyper perception. We perceive something, and if we consider what we perceive as the standard of realism, that everything would be matching to that perception. So, now technology would offer something crossing that our level of perception. So, that is called hyper perception. So, if hyper perception would be a reality for visual arena, there would be a simultaneous urge to get that hyper perception for sound also. So, what would be that? That would be a big question.